Whatever one you want. Good morning, everybody. We're just getting everybody up and live and get it going. Director of Security is doing his job in the background. Something's going on, so he's going to chime in for a minute. Oh, my word. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy Friday. I am so glad that y'all are here. And yeah, we're on. We're live. Sweet. So, hope you guys have had an amazing week. And I apologize for sounding the way I sound. I have developed this head cold. Fabulous. Love it. All right. So today is Friday, September 27th. And for those of you who are not quite familiar with who I joke around and I say that I'm a recovering HR professional. I've been doing HR for a long time. I've dealt with a lot of different personalities. I've dealt with a lot of really super difficult situations. And one of the things that I do now is that I actually help teams build high performing teams, and I help leaders who struggle with difficult personalities. My goal is really to help people like slice through the drama so that way they can like get to that next level so everybody's winning. That's what I love. I love it when everybody's winning. So today, this is kind of like a hot topic. Not everybody likes to look at this, but are leaders sometimes responsible for bad behavior in the workplace? And the answer to that is yeah, absolutely they are. And we're going to kind of talk about that today. So if you are a leader, if you're a manager, if you're a first-time supervisor, if you're a person who has a position in the company to where you're a high influencer, but you don't necessarily have the authority to like execute decisions or make decisions of matters of importance, this is for you. Right. And if you also happen to be an employee working in a company that has some enabling of some bad behavior, this is also for you. Okay. Typically, I focus in over on the leadership side, but you know what? There's a lot of helpful stuff that can help you at least understand at the very minimum what's going on. In addition to that, maybe even kind of formulate some suggestions along the way. So I'm going to touch on both today. And I wish this was a little bit more of a fun topic, but it's a good one nonetheless, and it's an important one on top of it. And I'm going to try and do this without sounding like I'm hanging on to life. So, all right, so let's talk about this. So, what does it mean when leadership actually enables bad behavior? Well, there's like three things that promote this. And it's very frustrating to employees, but there's this kind of like offset balance between perception. And let me help you understand what I mean by that. Is that leaders make decisions based off of matters of importance of what is going on and how it's going to impact the business. That means that like leaders, if you look at it from the concept of an airplane flying, right? Your CEO, your C-suite leaders, your super high level directors, like they're flying at about 30,000 feet, which means that they can actually see a wider horizon. And then let's say an employee who is doing the daily grind and they're only flying about 5,000 feet off the ground. So when the difference between 30,000 feet and 5,000 feet is that 30,000 feet, you see you see a big horizon. But when you're operating at 5,000 feet, everything is extremely detailed, right? You don't see the horizon. You see the buildings in front of you, the people walking on the ground. You see cars driving everywhere. You see the details. Well, that's a lot like leadership. And so when people are experiencing frustration working in the workplace and they have this sense that like leadership's not addressing something or management is not doing what they're supposed to, understand there's a very big difference of perception and what they see in front of them. And so employees, we see those of us who are flying at 5,000 feet, we see the minutia. We see the day-to-day stuff. We see the employees that are getting away with stuff. We see the employees that are winning, but we also see the stuff that we're doing that we're not getting recognized for. And then when you have managers or leaders who are flying at that 30,000 level, they don't necessarily see that much detail. They're looking at a much bigger picture. They're looking at, do we have enough money and cash flow coming in to make payroll? Do we have the right people in place so that way we can launch our next line of widgets and we can actually grow the business into the next life cycle, right? So you can see that there's two completely different viewpoints just to level the playing field out here so we understand who's looking at what. Now, your mid-level managers, they have to bounce, right? They're the ones that experience all this turbulence between flying at 30,000 feet and flying at 5,000 feet. They see the details, but yet they also have a glimpse or a glimmer. So they're bouncing up to about like maybe 25,000, 20,000 feet, right? They can see that there's a big picture, but they also see that there's a lot of minor stuff, all the smaller detailed stuff that's going on as well. Uh-oh, there's a new flash that just came in. Oh, no, I've been waiting for this. Oh, bummer. Dame Maggie Smith has passed away at age 89. Oh my gosh, the Dowager Countess of Grantham. Oh, she was such a great actress. Okay, sorry. Darn it. You can't just pass that one up. All right. Oh, heartbreaker. She was such a great actress. There's an amazing sense of humor too. Oh, okay. Well, there we go. We got that out of the system. All right. So back to where we were. So employees are going to be pretty quick to see some of the day-to-day issues at a much smaller level. Okay. Meaning it's the little things that add up to the bigger things. So perception, as you can see, is very specific to an employee, whereas a leader, they're looking at the large things, where one thing can actually lead to is a big thing and can lead into something actually much bigger. Okay. So one of the things that we have to do in order to be successful here is that we need to acknowledge problematic behaviors. And that requires communication. And to be honest with you, when you're coming from an employee standpoint and discussing this stuff with a manager, yeah, it can get a little creepy. It can also build up over time and it can get extremely frustrating. But here's the thing. If a leader doesn't take a moment to step back and actually consider what are problematic behaviors at that 5,000 foot level, there's a huge missed opportunity that's taking place. So could it enable bad behavior? Yeah, absolutely can, especially if it's not stopped, right? If it's not addressed, it gets left undone. And what's going to happen is that employees that are at this level of 5,000 feet operating in the day-to-day minutia, what's going to happen is that they're going to continue to get frustrated. They're going to be extremely frustrated. And one or two things are going to happen. Either they're going to leave very quickly because they believe and likely know that there is greener grass somewhere on the other side of the hill. Or what they're going to do is that they're going to numb up. They're going to continue to put their head down and do the work, but they're going to be absolutely miserable and they're not going to give 100%. Okay. So is it necessarily enabling bad behavior? Not really, but it's also not addressing it either. Okay. That's where your mid-level managers are coming in. Your mid-level people that are bouncing between that 5,000 and 25,000 foot ceiling, they're the ones really that have to deal with it. And so what happens is that it's a negative strike against that leader when they absolutely don't address it. Now, one of two things: they see it, they walk away from it, or they see it, don't recognize it, and then fail to address it. Or quite frankly, they just don't see it at all. Okay. When these things start to happen, everybody judges. Everybody judges. We're judgy people. People are judgy in general. If you don't believe me, just spend like 10 minutes on TikTok just scrolling and you'll hear a judgment of all kind, right? But that's what we do. And there's a couple of things that happens to a leader when they're confronted with having to deal with difficult or bad behavior. Number one, if they're inexperienced with it, they just simply don't know how to deal with it. And they're going to take a shot. Okay. They're going to do their absolute best to curb it. They may be successful at it. They may fail at it. But there's also, especially for like new managers, and I've got a client who's kind of dealing with this right now that I'm helping them work through, is that they may have a new first-time manager who doesn't really quite know how to address this, but they either have a history or some form of training or preconditioning that if they start to address this undesired behavior and the employee doesn't fix it, because it really is the employee's issue to solve, right? The employee is doing something that's bad behavior and the manager comes in and the employee doesn't fix it, one or two outcomes is going to happen. Either the manager is aware of the company's position when it comes to dealing with people with bad behavior, or they don't. And if they don't, and they go in and they deal with it, there is some preconditioning that exists. And and I've seen it throughout the history. I've been like hooked on this myself, is that if the employee doesn't fix their own individual behavior, the manager is held accountable for that. Now, a manager can only be held accountable for so much. If they're doing their job and addressing it, and the employee still doesn't change, there is an underlying fear where the manager doesn't know where their own individual safe landing is. So if they're being held responsible for somebody else's bad behavior, that's not good. But if they are doing everything they can to work with that employee to adjust and correct the behavior, and the company backs that up, that's a really good thing. But unless they fully understand where their soft landing is, and it's not a very conscious thing that happens, it's a very subconscious thing. It's an underlying fear that is present. I felt it, I've run into it myself, and it is extremely uncomfortable, right? So is that necessarily enabling bad behavior from a higher leadership level? Maybe not so, but if it's intentional, then yes. If it's unintentional, and even the higher level leaders are like, why can't you get your people together? And the person's like, I'm doing everything I can. That just simply means that now your leader that's faced with that needs some help. Okay, they need some coaching, they need some support, they need some guidance, they need some language that they can use, right? Because here's the thing, if you want your team to do like the good stuff day in and day out, right, then they need to rise to the occasion, which means that leaders need to recognize potential within each other. It means that leaders have to invest in growth. It means that leaders have to support with a purpose, and leaders have to engage with a vision. And if people are not falling in line with that, then leadership has to make a decision on what they're going to do moving forward, right? Because at the end of the day, we're leading people, and people are of nothing else but free will. Individual will is what you will always be up against. You're going to be always up against two things. You're going to be up against perception and judging, and you're always going to be up against individual free will. Okay, individual will. So how do you start navigating through this? Well, you have to set clear expectations and boundaries. All right, that's an absolute given. And if this is not something, if you're in a leadership position and you're really dialed into this right now, be it a frontline manager, mid-level manager, senior level manager, whatever, and you realize is like, holy cow, I don't set enough boundaries, or I don't set enough expectations, or I'm not clear on my expectations, it's really easy to get there. All right, start speaking to them repeatedly, time and time and time again. Your expectations should be crystal clear. I expect this. That is a clear expectation. Okay, if you start sounding like, well, I recommend, or I suggest, or I think this is what you should be doing, those are recommendations. That's not an expectation, which means that you're actually using passive language and not active language. So is that necessarily enabling bad behavior? Not directly, but it's not helping the situation either. And I have a leader I've known for a long time. He constantly uses passive language. I'm like, say this directly. Well, I'm shrinking, right? I want to sit there and go, you have to say it this way. And for those of you that missed that, it's this. Say it this way. You have to be direct. The shoulda, coulda, wouldas doesn't work. Okay, that's not direct language. It's indirect, and you'll fail every single time. You're not going to get your message across, and it's super important. Okay, set clear expectations and boundaries. Now, if you're an employee that you have a manager that wants you to do something and they're not being clear about it, let me tell you something. If you want to get a win, and if this is something that you want to get ahead, make more money, have more responsibility, feel better about yourself at work, here's what I highly recommend that you do. Sit down with your boss and say, what exactly are your expectations? Boom. And then get after it. Okay. Not everybody is good at communicating expectations, but if you recognize that you're not clear about the expectations, let me tell you something, you are only serving yourself. If you take that one step and jump in and sit in that seat in front of them and say, listen, I really want to get a good feel and a good grip on what your expectations are of me or of this job. Start with of the job, because everybody has expectations of people, but they may not be the right expectations. But if they're focusing on the expectations of the job, then guess what? You're in a much better place. All right, now here's where the secret sauce comes in. This is where perception and action don't always align, especially depending upon who's looking at the circumstance. So we know as adults that if you address a situation immediately, you know you're going to be engaged in some sort of conflict. Okay. If you don't address a situation immediately, it will do one or two things. It either die off on its own, or it's going to never change. Well, actually, three things. Or it's just going to get worse. Okay. Here's the difference. Let's start with the folks flying at 5,000 feet. Okay. Your day-to-day frontline employees are the employees that are actually doing like the labor work of the job. Okay. Or the administrative work or whatever. Okay. They're not leaders. We'll just put it that way. Sorry, I got mosquito bites all over the place. Got a lot of rain and they love me. All right. So I can sit here and itch my arm all day, or I can actually get through this last comment. Leaders will look at a situation much differently than employees do. Okay. And let me tell you something. If you feel like this is what you run into all day, I'm about ready to get you some serious good practices that will help you actually communicate to your leaders. And if you're loving this, do me a favor, start hitting that love button, and because feedback is great for me. Okay. If you're liking what you're hearing and you're liking what you're saying, go ahead and just say this is great in the comments, or start hitting the like, and I'll start seeing what's going on. So when a situation comes up and you start running into like, why aren't they doing anything about this? Leaders will make decisions based off of what is important in front of them. So what might be a problem for you working through the demands of your job may not necessarily be seen as important or working through the demands of your leader's job. That's where you have to come in and educate them a little bit. If you have an obstacle that you can't get through, that's when you need your manager's help. You have to help them understand why this is an obstacle, why this is a problem. Okay. Now, this really comes up when employees are running into issues when it comes to dealing with difficult coworkers, or they've got some sort of conflict, or they've got one person that just makes their life a living hell. I had this exact same thing happen to another client yesterday. There's an individual that likes to do things that are not part of her job, and it creates more work on my part, and I'm contracted for this company. I do fractional work for them, which means that I'm not a full-time employee, and I do very specific things. And what happens is that when this individual just runs in and does whatever it is that she thinks is right, she doesn't stop to ask questions, right? So I've been starting to convey this to him. I'm like, this is now the third instance of it. He understands it. And he says, but I don't understand why she's doing this. I said, exactly. That's the point. Now, we've known each other a long time. But when I talked to him, I said, when she does this, here's what's not happening. She's not going back and look. Ultimately, what happens to me is that, number one, it disrupts all the work that I've done. It now doubles my workload. And in addition to that, you get charged for that. So all that extra work that I have to do, you're getting charged for that. So he understands that, right? Because I broke it down. It doesn't have to be overly elaborate. And I'll tell him, it's like, I'm not engaging her in this conflict because it's not my position to do so. And he's like, yes, I understand that. Great. Fabulous. Right? It can be just something as simple as that. But until he actually realizes that it can be a problem and it impacts a bigger picture, not just impacts me, right? I'm not the one inconvenienced. Yes, it's a pain in the butt, but you know what? It's work. But I'm still going to get paid regardless, right? But if I have to keep fixing error or things that she's doing outside of her swim lane, outside of her purview, outside of what it is that she's, what she does, guess what happens? That means that I'm now doing double work, which means that I'm billing my client for that, right? That's a bigger picture right there. That's a much bigger picture. And then when it comes to compliance and all this other stuff, how it impacts that, that's an even greater picture because that has a bigger price tag than what I just charge on an hourly basis. And trust me, I am not cheap. Okay. I am worth every penny that I charge. Okay. So now let's take a look at it as somebody who's flying 30,000 feet. So somebody who flies at 30,000 feet as a leader, they're not somebody who's looking at the day-to-day stuff. They're not noticing that Bob comes in 15 minutes late every day regularly, right? And how that disrupts productivity or what that does to morale. He doesn't see that for the most part, right? And why? Because the CEO and the head shed, they're up there looking at the horizon. They're not looking at the minute details from somebody who's looking at the company from a 5,000 foot level. They're looking at it from 30,000 foot level. So they're wondering, do I have the right people to do the job? Because we have this product that's actually launching, or we're trying to grow and scale. Do I have enough people? Do I have enough Bobs? Do I have enough Johns? Do I have enough Susies? Do I have enough Jimmies? Do I have enough, Laneys in position to be able to actually do the work? Because if they can't, we're not going to sell. And I'm going to have to figure out how I'm going to keep these doors open to make payroll. That's the number one responsibility of a company, is to keep the door open to make payroll, not profit. Profit's great. Profit's what we want because profit gets recycled back into the company. It also allows for leaders to do extra stuff for their employees. It also means that they're going to get bigger support, greater support when it comes to gaining more capital. I mean, there's like a lot of things that happen when it comes to making profit, but that's not like the number one responsibility of a company. The number one responsibility of the company is to keep the door open so that they can make payroll. So that way you and I can eat and put a roof over our head and put our kids through school and all that other stuff, right? So where I'm going with this is that that sometimes leads to what we at 5,000 feet might perceive as a delay in addressing behavior. Because if it doesn't impact the bigger picture in a wider way, in a bigger way, to the leader, they've got bigger fish to fry. Not to mention the CEO and big leaders, like they own every problem in the company. CEO owns every single problem in the business. They're not the ones solving it. They have other people doing it, because if they have to get in and solve it, I can promise you it's not going to be a problem. But here's the thing with that too. Depending upon the level of importance of it, a leader will make a problem go away in a couple of different ways. Number one, they're going to address it and they're going to completely eliminate it. Number two, they're going to delegate it to somebody else, and the expectation is being set that that person's going to go ahead and take care of it. Number three, they're going to assess it and say, is this really a problem in the big picture? And if it's not, like eliminating a problem to them sometimes just simply isn't addressing it because they don't recognize it as a problem. That, therefore, that right there can be perceived as enabling bad behavior, or skirting something under the carpet, or sticking their head in the sand. So it's not always the leader not knowing what to do. Sometimes they just actually make a decision and say, this isn't worth my time, right? If I have people that can't get along, I'm going to throw that back down, to the manager of those individuals. And if they can't fix it, now I've got a bigger problem, because now I got a leadership issue, right? It's all about the trickle down. So, and then there's some people that just have inherently bad attitudes. And so when they blow off an issue, they're blowing it off because, quite frankly, it's just their attitude. So that happens. And, we don't necessarily like that. So, alrighty, my friends. So I hope that this has been extremely helpful for you today. And again, I apologize for the cold, but this has been a subject that's been kind of near and dear to my heart as part of my practice for a long time. This is something that I find myself talking about and helping leaders actually break down, is that, when is it appropriate to address issues? How do we go about addressing issues? And all that other good stuff. So, yeah. So if you happen to be a leader and you're finding yourself in some situations and you just like really realizing that the language that you're using may not be the best, or not, I'm not talking about like potty mouth language. I'm talking about like phrases that can help you like cut through the drama as fast as possible, then I'm going to encourage you to go visit and connect with me at yobrenda.com. And over at yobrenda.com, if you put in your information and your name, you're going to put in your address. I'm going to give you a free gift. And there's also a little spot. It's going to ask you, what was the one thing that you heard today from me that totally wowed you? When you put that information, is going to give you instant access to my impact course, or my impact scripts course. All right. And that is, I'm going to give you 3 scripts going to help you like really punch through and time collapse the type of conversations that you have to have with individuals. And I've been using them for years. They're extremely effective. I do it on them. I'm so used to using them now that I do it without even thinking about it. And it really helps like really cut through to the core and get to the root cause. And then that way you can move through these problems a lot quicker. And not to mention, if you're dealing with some difficult personalities, it also helps deal with that because you're not addressing the ego, you're actually addressing the problem. So you get a chance to address the problem, pull the person out of it. And trust me, they will look completely stupid if they sit there and try to keep saying things that don't make sense. So that's the benefit of these questions. So that's yobrenda.com. Would love to connect with you over there. And I want to thank you guys very much this morning for joining me. I am here typically. So right now, Thursdays are a little bit difficult. So I'm typically on live Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday, right about at the 10 a.m. Eventually, I'll get back into a full 5-day swing, but Thursdays are the wild days. So anyway, but yeah, totally appreciate you guys being here. And I look forward to seeing y'all again sometime soon. Actually, I will be back on Monday. And if you ever want to catch up on a lot of these topics that I talk about, you can find me over at my YouTube channel. You can also find a lot of these episodes I convert over into a podcast episode. You can find that it's called Solving People Problems. It's on every single podcast channel. It is broadcast universally. And in about 30 minutes, this is going to be loaded up in that as well. So thank you so much for joining me. Hopefully I won't sound like this on Monday. Well, sound better, not worse. And we'll talk to you guys later. You have a wonderful rest of your day.